understanding the linguistics, because even in every part of Africa, there are different versions of how we communicate. There are places in some of our countries that people don't really understand English. So to the extent politicians have to be able to speak the local languages to be able to communicate and send their messages. So I think in the conversation about uniting and understanding our diversity, it's important because, I mean, the continent is one, but the differences from east to west, from north to south, they're huge. So what form of identity, what form of unity can we identify that will be something that will be uniform across the continent? It's something that we can think of beyond the scope of this discussion. But just to piggyback on your conversation earlier on about Rwanda and what you managed to do with suppressing the ethnic identity, the Hutu or Tutsi, was it easy, especially, is it an opportunity to be able to suppress the differences, or is it important to speak about the issues that really cause the trauma that will be a true process of healing? Because, for example, for us in Liberia, we had 14 years of civil conflict. We went through the Truth and Reconciliation process. There was a whole process that's been ongoing, and people are still hurt. When people kill people and the manner of form in which it was done in Rwanda and other places, just suppressing it, it doesn't just go away like that. I mean, people who've done psychological, counseling, all of that will tell you that trauma doesn't heal by suppressing. So is it in the right frame of mind? Is it because, maybe it was right for, is it because of only 2 languages or 3? Or, what do you think is important?
Before you respond, I would let Adam give his take on the question, the broader question. Can you respond partly to the question she's answering?
Okay.
Either way, it's fine.
All right, I'll do all. Yeah. Let's see, you decide what I'm doing. So anyway, the point that I wanted to bring up is the idea that, the enshrining of English as the language of power, yes, that was a colonial project, but under colonialism, English was a language of power. It was one that was specifically defined as inaccessible to Africans, so it was a racialized language of power. So the idea that English is the language of power among Africans is an anti-colonial and then post-colonial development, in my view. And so I think that in terms of African English, these questions, I don't have any answers, but I think asking the questions is what's important. Because I think what we need to get away from is the colonial idea whereby there are different so-called tribes, and each tribe has its language, right? And we all read about the invention of tribalism or the invention of ethnicity under colonialism, but the invention of language was exactly the same thing. So you had anthropologists, colonial administrators, and missionaries going out to each of these so-called tribes as defined by colonial anthropologists or the colonial government, and writing ethnographies and writing language guides, right? So taking an area that has a diffuse range of languages and dialects and everything else and defining it as 3 or 4 distinct so-called languages, and then constructing trees whereby they're related and whatnot. So I think it's that idea whereby, it's that colonial idea of language in Africa, whereby different tribes have different languages, and then there's sort of an overarching language that is the language of power. That's what needs to be gotten away from, in my view. And there's many ways in that which that's being broken down. There's ways from an idea of African English to ideas of so-called, the name Pidgin or Creole obviously always involves a kind of diminishment, which I don't think it should have. But also, everybody talks about Sheng in Nairobi, and the kinds of different developments of language, that's what needs to be taken seriously, these trans-language developments, right? The different ways, and that's what we need to be paying attention to in order to get away from this colonial idea of language that I think is really still too prevalent.
Right. So thank you very much. I think she wanted me to talk about the catalytic relief effect, of not suppressing, let's say, pain and trauma. But I think we are behind time. So Yeah, a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay, so make the questions.
Thank you. Hello? Yeah, thank you for this wonderful conversation. I'd like to problematize both the question and the conversations a little bit. In such a way to show how the questions are related, but also to show how the relocation of diversity to modernity, and also how it shapes modern identity. Because both of you mentioned identity, and I'm wondering to what extent you saw the role of diversity in making a modern identity in Africa, and how that reflected in fracturing the inherited notion of national identity we have that causes the confusion, the ruptures in modernity. And as you mentioned about we had conflicts in the past, but what it means to be a Rwanda 300 years ago is completely different from what it means after colonialism. And then the continuities and discontinuities between that idea of what it means to be an African before colonialism and how it shaped the modern notion of identity that was imposed upon from above, and the fractures it reproduced. And then, of course, how then the differences that was not supposed to be the location of rupture became politicized. So, to extent, we have, like in the case of Nigeria, we have issues in Pakistan, and then people in Northern Nigeria will react in support of the Pakistani Muslims as opposed to Nigerians within Nigeria. And Donald Trump is elected, and some of us go, our brother is elected. And we see those things. So, I wanted to see.
That's pointed out from Asian Rwanda to Donald Trump. I don't know if you want everybody to answer that question. We don't have time.
Yeah, we don't. So I think what we'll do is that let's have the questions.
Yeah, a couple of questions. People who haven't spoken yet, okay? Let's be brief.
Thank you very much. Very wonderful panel, very wonderful idea. Thanks, Gordon. My question is, isn't it that we actually have, when things come to Africa, they are seen differently? Elsewhere in the world, diversity is seen as a good thing. When it comes to Africa, diversity is a problem. I come from Uganda where we have 64 ethnic differences within one space. No single language is spoken by more than 5% of the population. And that is an identity we cherish. It's an identity we value. When we are calling about the English, we do it in English. I think it should really be focusing on why are these things mobilized for conflict, more than diversity itself being the problem. I think we should be asking questions around the mobilization of identity and difference for particular missions. Because in these countries, people are not calling and fighting every day. It is at particular points in time. So if we ask that and we find around which the mobilization is done, I think then we will have a better thing. Because if we have come together, as you said last week, Adam, English being a racialized language, when you come to Uganda, the language of colonial expansion was not even English, it was Uganda. So I think we need to take the discussion further.
Further, but for only about 3 more minutes altogether, otherwise people will have no break. There's one more. Make it tight, okay? And then you've got 3 minutes for the whole thing. The whole.
So the institution of a nation state, as we have it now in Africa, means that for the state to function, everybody has to function well, everybody has to be involved in the political process. Now, in a situation where we do have all these different tribes, cultures, and languages, we get into a situation where many people who speak the same language, or people in power speak the same language, and on the other side as well, we see people, let's say, even in countries where they have a national language that's English, that should be accessible to all because of issues to do with education, whether there are people that can't read or people that don't understand English. So what will happen is, in terms of the political process, they're kind of excluded from it. They don't know what party's doing what for them. They don't have any control over what's happening in the country. Now, I just wanted to think, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. So I think we've run out of time, but I'll give just 10 seconds each, after which I'll draw my conclusion.
So choose one of the 3 questions.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
I just wanted to address the question of the nation state and the participation of all people. The question of participation in the political process doesn't necessarily, to me anyway, the problem that we have in the African continent isn't so much that people are not being, it's that the governments that you have at the moment use the differences or perceive the real, because we do know that identity and diversity is a constructed idea. It's not real. It's not, you know, but they use these construct ideas to frame it so as certain groups can acquire as much resources as possible. And the difficulties then are not about languages, they're not about people living in different parts of the countries or not being able to relate. The difference are that you have very, very small groups of people who use patrimonial networks to maintain their grasp on power.
Thank you so much. Yeah, good one.
Yes, just quickly, I'll just address the question on modernity and diversity. I think the word of yesterday and today and tomorrow is different. Globalization, things are changing, but what we must be careful about is not to suppress or demonize what was and to what will be. There should always be a balance in understanding. I mean, like we talked about how people look at, especially the colonial mentality about what is good and what is not good, and demonizing the African identity or that issue. So we need to be able to find a balance between that, you know, and that's what's important at the end of the day.
I'll look forward to discussing over coffee. So, thanks.
Good man.
So thank you very much. Let me conclude by saying that in all of these conversations, we need to traditionalize modernity and modernize tradition. Now, once we do that, we find ourselves polishing the pearls of ancient wisdom, and we can unite our diversity. Thank you so much for the participation.
Thank you very much. Shout out to the panel.
Coffee break.
Thank you very much. Time for a coffee break.